uveitis in my right eye. And today my husband had patient surgery. The surgery went well, and he's resting in another room. So I'm hoping to stay in here full class, but if not, I'll be checking on him. And thank you all for your prayers.
Oh, well, thank God you're doing better, and thankfully his procedure was a success, and we'll definitely keep you in prayer.
Thank you.
No problem. Jonathan, how are you doing? Right. Daniel, what about you? How are you doing?
Good,
Cool.
thank you, doctor. Very good. Thank you. Sorry, I'm working.
Oh, you're working. Okay, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh man. So you're doing well?
Very good, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Phenomenal. All right. And Herb, how are you doing? Herban.
I'm doing fine, thanks. I'm doing good. Thank God for another day of work.
Amen. And Terrence? Terrence looks like he's having some technical difficulty. You're muted. Terrence? Okay. All right, phenomenal. Well, let's keep moving. Terrence is connecting to audio. So I have a quick case study for us, and I'll try to do case studies as much as possible. I think we learn significantly from case studies and just having conversation regarding case studies and figuring out how we would resolve them. At various junctures, I may ask may ask one of you to lead a case study. But tonight, here is our case study, and I hope you can see this. So, you are charged, Pastor, with planning a church in Stamford, Connecticut. Stamford is an affluent bedroom community of New York City. Stamford is a 45-minute train ride to Manhattan. Many young professionals are migrating to Stamford. As you plan the congregation, you realize the population you've attracted is predominantly young adults, mainly millennials. You also realize that church does not have the financial wherewithal to remain viable. There are hundreds of worshipers, but few that are systematically benevolent. These millennials are committed and dedicated in various other ways, but financial. You learn that millennials have the lowest financial literacy of any generation. How do you address this challenge? There are a couple edits here that I need to make. So let's go for it. Pastor, any one of you, you're assigned to plant a church in Stamford, and you see that you have a significant millennial population. The millennials are otherwise committed, but they're not giving financially. How do you handle it?
Well, one of the ways, Pastor, I would look at it, if you have young adults, they probably have young children. And if they're commuting back and forth to New York, one of the needs might be a daycare center. That'd be a way to bring finances into the church. Also, before and after school programs.
Okay.
Maybe some youth programs to get the kids involved. I found that once you get the children involved and the parents get involved, then when you meet the needs of people, it's easier for them to be more financially involved in the church.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're the older crowd. They're more disciplined as far as giving their tithes, where younger people want to see something tangible of what the church is doing for them before they come off their tithes.
Okay, that makes sense. So Terrence, your approach would be to address some of their structural concerns, perhaps
Yes.
try to create a daycare, some after-school care, uh, before school care, try to alleviate some of their burden, and that will generate funds for the church.
Mm-hmm. Even like a youth soccer program.
Yeah, I
something
got you.
like that. Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyone else, or what do we think about Terrence's idea? Yeah. Mhm. Right. Mhm. So Daniel, let me ask you a question because I think you made an assumption. You're saying they don't have a lot of money. Right. Or yeah. So okay,
Well, I mean, I would,
I'm following you. Go
um,
ahead.
oh,
No, go right ahead.
okay.
And I apologize
I,
for misspellings here. I
I have
dictated.
I have a lot of nephews and nieces that are actually being faced with the same issue that you're bringing up, and it's a good one actually. Um, Most of them will pay their tithe, but as you know, the tithe is not going to go to the church. So I'm assuming that these folks are in church and they're paying their tithe, but offering gets a big hit because young people are still trying to pay off their student loans. They're still trying to get their first car. They're trying to get their first down payment to get a house. So there are some constraints that are tangible that
Hmm.
these folks are actually dealing with before they can have. And I'm not saying you can't, because they're also still working on their faith and trying to develop faith and trust that a little that I have, if I give some to the Lord, it would grow. So that would be one area that we do have to address. How do you mature young people to be faith venturers as they go up? Because no matter how you do it, and I like what was said earlier, if the church is not relevant to them, then they're not going to invest or sacrifice for the church as well. And that ranges for a whole cross section of issues, including if they do have children, they don't want their children to be babysat when they come to church. They want the children to be ministered to as well.
Hmm.
So you definitely want to start besides the things we talked about earlier, but you have to have a very strong children's ministry at the church.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, I mean, it's more than just daycare, but I mean, it's when they do come to church. I mean, what are you doing to excite the kids? And if they are excited, then they will bring mom back to church,
Yeah.
and mom will see some value,
Hmm.
uh, and will come off of some of the money that is trying to save to do these other things that we talked about. And I can
Yeah.
go on and on and on, but I think that would be one of the areas that I would start with is
Yeah.
on those issues.
No, that sounds good. So anyone else or any feedback?
Yeah, I think I should have, because we're actually trying to do this at our church too, so you already know Pastor Del Hay. But one
Yeah.
of the things I'm also looking at too is implementing the Pathfinder. We have things in our church that are relevant. We have Pathfinder, we have a Ventures Club,
Keep
and
going.
so if you integrate that into daycare, if you have the youth soccer program, have them run concession stands, you're doing different things while that's going on. That brings the community kids also
Yeah.
into the church. I think one of the things that we always focus minister from within,
Mm.
and that's what I liked about when I was listening to the sermon, that we need to learn to minister from outside in instead of inside out. If we minister, make sure our programs are drawing people from outside the church
Yeah.
into the church. And if they're professional, that means they're probably college educated. If they're college educated, they look at things in an analytical way of looking at things. And so you have to kind of meet them at where they're at and make sure that what we're doing is not just basic traditional church things, that we're actually meeting things that are meaningful, like you
Right.
were saying, Dr. Fleming, that are meaningful to their
I
day-to-day
got you.
life
I
needs.
got you.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you all hear me?
Now, one,
yeah,
Yes,
yes.
I'd like to make a comment. You're talking about
Okay. I think
people who,
We can't hear you, friend.
Okay. You're talking about people who are driving 45 minutes to work one way and then coming back. I like the idea of the activities and things for the children. I think you also should, since we are affluent and we're business savvy in some sort of way, we ought to have some kind of series where we're talking about the church and getting the church up and running and talking about finance with them, explaining what needs to be done. You know, before you can go outside, you need to get a strong inside infrastructure. And I think that's what you need to work on. And since they're dedicated, but they're not financially savvy, I would, literate, I would make sure that they understand what is happening with the church, what the church needs are. I would probably plan some nights, like when prayer meeting night, maybe have dinner or something so that they wouldn't have to run home, but do like maybe a potluck or something where they can kind of relax before they have to go into their home and have to deal with their children and whatever else is out there. You know, so not only are you looking at the kids, but you're also looking at the fact that the adults need to be made aware of what's going on in the church and be taught, since they're financially illiterate, about the finances and how the church operates.
Um, I mean, this might be now getting out of the box, but part of my capstone that I'm working on is I do believe, though, that as we go through these days, that the amount of money for efficient and pertinent ministries may come to a point that it's even beyond the amount of money that you can generate from your membership.
Yeah.
And I think as a church, especially a church like this one, that we also must consider, after dotting all those I's and T's, that we must come to a place that we may have to develop low risk, safe business ventures to support ministries. Because I mean, I've done some events all my life, and I go to all these churches and we have these ministries with few exceptions. But it's an attempt to do something, but it's nowhere close to the mark. And a lot of times the underlying cause is because we don't have the money. We talked about that last week. And yes, getting grant money and all that stuff is okay, but I don't see any reason why we cannot get into low risk business ventures, farming, whatever else we want to do to try to support ministries.
For sure.
And try to avoid always on the backs of other people.
Right.
I mean, I'm a physician right now, and I do make decent income, but I must confess, with COVID, I'm down 45% of what I was making 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Because nobody's coming to church. So if I don't have if I had other streams of income, I'd be suffering. And I think churches should also consider multiple streams of income instead of just relying on this one trough trying to get money.
Yeah, yeah. So I appreciate all of you, and I think anyone else want to weigh in on this? So let me respond to some of what I've heard, and I think you guys are making some excellent points here, and I wish when I was in this position 6 years ago that you all could have been my think tank. Perhaps things would have been a little different. So I was in this position, as I said, 6 years ago, and what was born of that was my dissertation. And this dissertation and project was completed at New York Theological Seminary, and it's entitled Financial Literacy and Millennials, Increasing Stewardship Through Financial Empowerment. So, and I think a few of you mentioned it, and I put it in the case study. Millennials have the lowest financial literacy of any generation. So millennials, there was a study done out of Georgetown University supported by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a major accounting firm, that speaks to only 12% of millennials being able to pass a basic 3-question financial literacy test. Yeah. So millennials are, yeah. And the three questions, if I can remember them, and I'm sure you all could pass this test. Question number one was, if you put $100 in the bank and you have an annual interest rate of 2% in 5 years, will you have $102, more than $102, less than $102? And I mean, the answer is,
Yes.
it's clear. In 5 years, you'll have more than $102, right? Um, the second question was, if you put money in the bank and your interest rate from the bank is 1% and the inflation is 2%, in a year, will you be able to buy your purchasing power? Will it be the same? Will it be greater? Or will it be less? And again, the answer is clear. If inflation is 2% and you've only gotten 1% interest, your buying power will be less. I can't remember what the third question was, but the third question, only 12% of millennials were able to answer all three questions. So I said to myself, and Daniel, you made a good, I was trying to lift up something you said. I think we often make the assumption millennials don't have money. And I don't think it's that they don't have money. It's that they're not very good stewards of their resources. So one of the approaches that I took at that church was developing a financial literacy course. And it was an 8-week course where I brought in professionals to teach on financial literacy. We're talking credit, insurance, wills and estate planning, um, banking, savings, credit, investing, various topics. And we did pre-test, post-test to see the growth of their financial literacy. Most or all of them grew in their financial literacy, and going forward, they were able to better manage their resources. And I think it kind of became the culture of the church where people kind of manage their resources well. And we saw giving increase. The
And that's,
next,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to say that's true because I used to sell financial services. I used to sell annuities and life insurance and IRA accounts. And I remember I had a couple of seminars out of church, and I just couldn't get the young people to really understand. And one of the things I was trying to explain to them was how, like, our Jewish brothers and sisters, how the next generation was able to become financially more stable through life insurance, because it's the only thing that we have in the United States that's not taxed by the government upon death. I said, so they invested a lot of their funds in life insurance and also property, land. And buying a new car every 3 years is not an investment, you know. So I was trying to bring them different, but some of that I think is cultural, and some of it is millennial and within our culture. And I think our culture is hurt more than other cultures because a lot of us don't come from families that have a legacy.
Right.
So where other cultures, there's legacy. So that's one of the things I've really been trying to focus on, but it's really hard. I don't know how we're going to move as a church, because even when you provide the information, it's not taken in.
So I actually think one of the inroads is to look at, and this is something that I addressed in my research, social justice. So how is social justice connected to the economic plight of millennials? So the argument that I made is that the United States has engaged in a societal sin with this student loan crisis, right? So higher education is not regulated. The cost skyrockets. It's gone up maybe 500% over the last 30 years or so. And financial aid has not kept pace with the cost of higher education, which then leaves people indebted because they have to take student loans. And we all know that there's a $billion worth of $1 trillion rather worth of student loan debt in the nation. So the argument that I made is that our society is sinning. It's like a corporate sin. Walter Brueggemann, I believe his name is Walter Brueggemann, he's a theologian, talks about societal, corporate kind of structural sin. So we can sin as a nation, we can sin as a church, corporations can sin, dumping in a river some toxic chemical that is, a corporate sin. And so that was the angle that I attacked it from, that we are sinned against. We are the victims of this evil empire, in essence, and that drew some attention. So, but I raised the case study because I want us to look at approach problems, and I know you all are working on your projects, and we're approaching a problem that and trying to unearth, what exactly is going on beneath that problem. So for me, it wasn't that they're just not giving and they're not committed. They were committed. They were the musicians. They were the board members. They were the leaders of the church. I just had a sense that they didn't have the financial wherewithal to support. So one thing was testing some of my assumptions, right? So is my assumption that they don't have money? Is it that they're not committed? Or is there something deeper at play? I think another issue is doing research, which brings in the academic component why we're sitting here tonight, doing research to bring to bear on the matter. One of the questions that I researched was perspectives on wealth, Jesus's perspective on wealth. I mean, is there something within Christianity that just says, hey, we should be poor managers of our funds, that we should be in poverty? Jesus made statements like, the poor you'll have with you always. And I realized how many wealthy followers Jesus actually had in the New Testament. So wealth was not an issue, and poverty is not part and parcel with Christianity. So I want us to test assumptions and to go and to look for the deeper meaning behind some of the issues that we face, and then just create a strategy to go about remedying it. So that was my approach, was teaching on financial literacy. And I think there's value in everything that we've said. I definitely see our church as needing some business ventures that not only will bolster our bottom line, but there'll be evangelism. And I mean, we have this health message that I think we've allowed other people to put a copyright on. I mean, the Impossible Burger, seriously, like we should have created that Impossible Burger. I mean, all of these juice bars from Jamba Juice to all these juice bars, and we don't have any. So I absolutely think that we can, there are business ideas that are complementary to the church and to the ministry that we do. So I'm with you guys, and I think that there were some great concepts as we discussed some of our as we discussed this case study. Anything else anybody wants to share or say on this before we move on?
Well, did you see when you said the giving increase, was that across the line offerings and tithe, and was it a nice bump?
Oh yeah, it was for sure. It was across the board. And right now the church has, and the church was formed 6 years ago. Right now they have $400 and I think $60,000 in the bank. So,
man.
Yeah,
You get a loan from them.
Yeah. The problem is that they're in Stamford, which is super expensive. So their funds don't go far. And they're trying to purchase a church building. I'm not with them anymore. The last church we looked at was some $3.5 million, I think. So they're challenged, but The Lord has been with them thus far. So for this evening, or anything else on the case study? All right, fantastic. So this evening at 7, my time, which I think, Francina, you may be the only person, Central Time, which is 6 your time. We're going to have a guest speaker, Pastor Marquise Johns will be with us. Pastor Johns is the Community Services Director of the Southeastern California Conference, and he is also the evangelist for the Black churches in the Southeastern California Conference. He pastored for some time in Philadelphia, and he also pastored right outside Washington, D.C. in Hyattsville, Maryland. He's a native of California. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with him. And so he's going to be sharing with us regarding social justice tonight. On the topic of social justice, because the reason why I'm discussing social justice with you, and I mentioned this last week, the Barna Institute has shown that millennials are leaving the church because of the lack of emphasis on social justice. And we as church leaders have to help shine the light on social matters of social justice. Wherever you are politically, I think Joe Biden is making a calculated decision to go after matters of social justice. So even in his inaugural address, he lifted up white supremacy. I believe there was an executive action yesterday on equity and justice. And in young adult millennial circles, that type of thing is welcome and overdue. And so I think he's really making a play for a younger generation, a generation of people who primarily are thinking in terms of justice versus injustice. And the church has to, if we're going to remain relevant with our community, we have to be talking matters of justice. And I think we get it as a church, and much of our community outreach is motivated by matters of injustice, but we're not verbalizing it. I don't think we have the language to articulate our position on matters of justice. So for example, why do we operate food pantries? Well, we operate food pantries because not just because there are hungry people out there, but because we see some injustice where in regards to food. So whether it is injustice in terms of access to food, whether it's injustice for access to quality food, whether it's injustice because we believe homeless people should be able to have a warm meal and they shouldn't just eat bagged sandwiches, whatever. We operate from a place of addressing injustice, but I don't think we always articulate that. So one of the goals in this course for me is that we would articulate our position on matters of justice. And Pastor John's just logged on. And justice, there, so the church has been doing work on matters of justice in various areas. So economic justice, right? So for many years, the church has been talking about economic financial matters. We have been addressing equal pay. We've been addressing issues like poverty and the reasons for poverty. I was just on a press conference today, a virtual press conference with the Speaker of the House of the state of Connecticut. My church is a part of an organization, the Greater Hartford Interdenominational Alliance for Action, and we are addressing a malady that exists in only 2 states, in the state of Connecticut and in the state of New York, something called welfare liens. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with welfare liens, but welfare liens are when someone has been on public assistance and after they have gotten back on their feet and, they accomplish whatever they're accomplishing, the government places liens on their property to recover the expenses that the government laid out when they were accessing public assistance. So there was a woman at the press release today who had been on public assistance for many years in her early 20s. She's now in her 60s. She's ready to retire. And the government has stepped in, the state of Connecticut has stepped in, placed a lien on her property. So she wanted to sell her home. And she recognizes now that it's a $100,000 lien. So she's not going to be able to pull out the equity that she thought she was to prepare for retirement. When she received her COVID stimulus checks, those were taken by the government, garnished. And so she really feels crippled by the welfare lien situation. And in Connecticut, clergy members are arguing that there is something wrong with this picture. Had someone access public assistance because they were disadvantaged, and now that they've done what we wanted them to do, they haven't stayed on public assistance. They've gone out, they've accomplished the dream, they've purchased property. I mean, they're contributing to society. Now the state comes and places a burden on them. So I think the church has been agitating in matters of economic injustice, even environmental matters. And I think the church has been so silent on matters of environmental justice. And it's critical that we speak up. We, especially Seventh-day Adventists, the Bible says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. Literally, we believe God created the earth in 6 days. And if there's anyone that should have a reason to argue for environmental justice, it should be us. I mean, if there's anyone who should be talking about climate change, that's in our wheelhouse. And these matters of justice are attractive to the people that we minister to in our church and the wider community. So social justice, clearly issues of racism, prejudice, white supremacy, housing injustice. So even in Hartford, where I pastor, we, the same organization that I was telling you about, GIA, we organized to against slumlords. So slumlords are landlords that don't take care of their property. And we got together because we have, Hartford is known as one of the top 10 cities in the country with the worst rat infestation problems because of slumlords who won't even take the time to invest in proper, properly barricading their properties, sealing holes, etc., proper extermination services. And so as a community, clergy, we came together and we argued to the mayor that these landlords should not be allowed to own property. Many of them were fined because of their behavior as slumlords. Some of them had liens placed on their properties after the fines were not paid, and some have given up their properties because they don't want to be involved anymore. So the church cannot be silent on these matters of justice, whether it's housing justice, social justice, food justice, environmental, gender, economic matters of justice have to be paramount in our thinking. That brings us to the sermon that we watched. What was your feedback, or what's your thought? What's your takeaway from that sermon in terms of justice?
Well, I think one of the main theme I got from is that the church has, not all the church, but there's guys from the pulpit preaching have gotten away from the theme of Christ and the character of Christ. They've gotten into their own personal agendas. He brought up the preachers of LA, Los Angeles, that TV show they had, and how if you ever saw it, it was kind of, it did disservice to the ministry. These guys are driving Bentleys, and they were talking about how they could manipulate the congregation for their own personal gains. His thing, and it's kind of like what you're talking about with the slum landlords, and it all kind of plays into effect. Everybody is about what can I do to get what I want, not what could I do to serve Christ. And he was saying, even as we as parents, when we were growing up, how we lived in our house, we didn't have a choice about going to church. If I lived in my parents' house, I had to go when my parents told me to go. And it planted the seed of God in me. Whereas we have people now, their kids are 10, 11, they tell them they're not coming to church, and the parents go to church and leave the kids at home. You know, you're not going to, when I was growing, you're not going to live in my father's house, and that's who I am, and make a decision like that. If you want to make the decision, you need your own place. So I think what he was dealing with, the bottom line that I got from this sermon was that we need to get back to Jesus. We need to get back to basics. And also that our ministry should be bigger than just preaching. He talked about providing housing for the elderly and the different community projects that he did. God blessed him to do in this ministry. I think that's important too, that we and I think as Seventh-day Adventists that we're kind of, the way that our pastor structure and conference is set up, we don't have the opportunities of maybe a Church of God in Christ or a Baptist church where a pastor stays in one place for 30 years and is really entrenched in the community because you guys move around so much. Right. But I like what he was saying, and I think that we need more of that, especially in the Black community. I think it's essential if we're going to strive and grow spiritually.
Absolutely. Any other feedback? I one of the things that I liked was this idea of the kingdom not being something far off and inaccessible, not being a reality that is only present in heaven, but the kingdom can come now, and we can go about agitating for a better society for our people. Yeah.
I like the fact that he said that God didn't appoint us to churches, he appointed us to communities. And that's why we have to look at kingdom building. And we have to look at the value of others. And a person should actually be able to walk into the church and walk out feeling empowered. And then they should have help. Otherwise, we're like that dog waiting for the bell to ring so that we can move around and do things. Whereas we should be out getting our communities and things together, working to move everything forward and not settle for good. He really stressed the fact that we should be looking at great, and asking God, what's the next thing that I can do instead of settling for good, for what we've already done. Be looking for more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The sermon cut off towards the end, but one of the things that he said was it had to be the late 80s or early 90s. It had to be the late 80s. There was land in Queens. He pastors in Queens right down the road from the conference office. As a matter of fact, the Northeastern Conference office is on Merrick Boulevard. Floyd Flake's church is on Merrick Boulevard, and the street has been named in honor of Floyd Flake. So it's actually now Floyd Flake Boulevard. Floyd Flake, in the 80s, he was pastoring a church of 1,200 members, certainly a significant church, especially in that day and age. What he did was they found land in their community. They worked with the government to secure financing to build homes, to build duplexes. And I've driven through the community. They had to have built at least 100 of them. And they worked on the mortgages to ensure that with the financing, it could be the owner could occupy the property, and the rent from the other unit would pay the mortgage. I think it was around $800 a month. So the going rate for the unit would be $800, and for one unit would be $800, and the mortgage would be $800. So it was a home that would essentially be of no cost to the owners. And they sold those homes to many in the community. And when he talks about he's asking God, what next? So they built a school. They built an elementary school. They built a high school. These are charter schools that they built. They went on to engage in several other projects. Of course, Floyd Congress, and he was in the Congress, I believe, for 10 years as a representative from Southeast Queens. And while there, he was able to funnel funds towards projects that he was personally involved in. And so they built this massive senior citizen center. It's got to be at least 500 units of senior housing. And it was government subsidized. And after 20 years, I believe, ownership of it would be turned over to the church. And those 20 years have elapsed. And so the church now completely owns and operates this senior center. It's called Allen AME Senior Housing. They do case management. They have transportation services. They built retail across the street from their church. So in the community, there wasn't a bank. They brought in a Chase Bank. There wasn't an accessible pharmacy in that immediate area. They brought in a pharmacy. There weren't restaurants, so they brought in restaurants. And so they've really transformed the community that they serve. That's not the only place that's been done, where the church has had a vision for transforming a community and has worked in a concerted effort to focus on resolving matters of justice. Remember last week we watched a video regarding community development corporations, and the gentleman said that they started with a survey. They looked at all of the issues of their time, and they tried to address every one, and they did address every issue and more. And so I think if we sit down and make a concerted effort like Flake to look at all of the issues in our community and say, listen, we want to address every one and do it in a systematic manner, it may take us 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but we can certainly address those issues. Anything else? What else did we get out of that sermon?
The phrase that he used, we built a ceiling of limitations, and now I can understand, a little bit more why he said that with all the details that you just explained. And I know he talked some of the stuff that he did in the sermon. Basically when I listen to that sermon and I think about the class we had last week and the videos that you show about the Adventist Community Service and all that they're doing, is like, and looking at the case study, we really need to think outside the box. I mean, honestly, we can't really depend on the church funds anymore if we want to expand the ministry. We need to find ways. I'm putting together a nonprofit to get funds to do training for our medical cadets. So I mean, I love the sermon. I wish I could see the whole thing because it did cut off at the end. And one thing that he said, that sometimes our limitations are just our beliefs or traditions that we have in the church that are stopping us from moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that specifically for Seventh Adventists, maybe our eschatological orientation to ministry might have been a handicap for us.
Absolutely.
We thought that God would have come by now, so we did not take advantage of it. So it's not that we didn't have the skill set; we just didn't think it was necessary. Much closer to the end of time, unfortunately, and we lost a lot of opportunity. But I do think, though, that we should occupy until he comes, and do it to the best of our ability, instead of just trying to do this busy work and not doing things that are life-changing.
Yeah. And to add to that, not only did we think, okay, perhaps the Lord is going to come in the next 30, 40, or 50 years, but I think, as I was mentioning last week, that a part of our theology really believe things are going to get worse before Jesus comes. And so we almost see the deterioration of society, deterioration of our communities as being indicative of the coming of the Lord. And one of the sayings that I totally detest is it's a sign of the times. So after some catastrophe, we really absolve ourselves of any responsibility to help when we say, oh, it's a sign of the times. And really what we're saying is Jesus is going to come back and remedy it. And so there's no need for my church or for me to be involved. So I totally agree. Our eschatology has worked to our detriment when it comes to engaging our community. Anything else? Anyone else? So ministers like Floyd Flake have existed not just in this day and age, but for almost really going back to the existence of the Black church. The Black church has always been the conscience of the community. It's been a nerve center. It's been the data processing center where we kind of bring together all of our views. Remember, the civil rights movement was led by clergy. It was almost a church-sponsored movement, and every significant movement that has happened in the African American community really has been led by the church. Adventism, or Black Adventism, though, is an amalgamation of Blackness. So we try to be authentically Black, but there is this European eschatology that really plays with us, and we're torn. You know, in the Baptist church or in the or in the AME church, it's fine for us to really discuss matters of justice. It's almost expected. And in the Adventist church, because of our roots, because of this whole concept of us being disconnected, and really the Eurocentric thought process that drives our denomination, we have been so disconnected from the issues of our community. And when I say Eurocentric thought process, um, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in theory and thought is a very Caucasian church. And our leadership tends to be quite Caucasian. I mean, we've never had a Black president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I think it shows, right? So the president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Ted Wilson, will see civil unrest in the United States and not even address it. It's not even a thing for him. As a matter of fact, Delbert Baker, who was a vice president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and who was prior to that the president of Oakwood University, got into significant trouble with the leadership of the church when he attended the funeral service for one of the ministers who was killed at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It was almost as if the leadership of our church was saying, don't get involved in matters of social justice. And it's really our leadership trying to stay above the political fray. But Jesus' ministry, the gospel is political. The gospel is extremely political. The gospel can be divisive. And that's fine. Jesus says, I didn't come to bring peace. I come to bring a sword. There is a part of the gospel that is so confrontational. And I think our church almost wants to whitewash that away. And we want a Jesus that's almost like Barney. And that's not who Jesus really is. Jesus was probably more of a radical. And I'm encouraging you to recover that social justice orientation. not just social justice, justice, period. And many of the prophets of the Old Testament spent significant time talking about justice. Jesus himself, in his declaration, says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," and everything else he was talking about were matters of justice. He says he's preaching good news to the poor. You know, he's setting those free who were shackled and oppressed. Um, and the church has to recover that. The Black church has to recover that. Our guest presenter is on, Pastor Marquise Johns. I'm going to, before he comes on, and I know he's ready to go, fired up and ready to go. Let's take a 2 or 3 minute break. I know, Fran, you probably need to check on your husband. And so let's go ahead and take a 4 minute break, and let's reconvene at 7 o'clock my time, 6 o'clock Fran's time, 4 o'clock Pastor John's time. All right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock. All right, everybody. I hope the break was not a bad idea. I hope everyone comes back. All right. So, Daniel, you're going to be logging off.
So I'm gonna stay logged in because I'm recording the class, but
Okay.
I'm gonna be muted because I'm gonna be in the church meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Go right ahead. All right, Terrence, Fran, Jonathan, you guys are quiet. Let's go ahead and get started, and they'll catch us on the recording. So we have with us Pastor Marquise Johns. Pastor Johns is one of the foremost thought leaders. Jonathan is there. Pastor Johns, welcome back. Is one of the foremost thought leaders, especially in matters of justice in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Pastor Johns is a native of California, where he currently resides. He has a powerful testimony of his walk with the Lord, of transformation, of redemption, of salvation. Pastor Johns is a graduate of Oakwood University and Washington Adventist University, the great Oakwood. And he currently serves the Southeastern California Conference as Adventist Community Services Director, as well as evangelist of the regional churches, the Black churches. And I'm sure he probably wears 5 or 6 other hats just because that's who he is. He is a personal friend of mine. He pastored the Metropolitan Seventh-day Adventist Church in Hyattsville, Maryland, and the North Philadelphia Church in Philadelphia. And we welcome him tonight as he shares with us on matters of justice. Pastor Johns.
Thank you so much. Just pray my internet. We have been having some wind and stuff out here in Eastvale, California. And I'm sure you always are aware of the fires that rage and what we call in my neck of the woods in the Inland Empire, the Santa Ana wind. So just pray that the Lord gives us a strong internet connection. Before we get started, I want to ask each of you to do something for me. I'd like you to each put in the chat menu whether you believe that church is called to be church in the community, church to the community, or church with the community. I'd like everybody to log their answers. As you're logging your answer, has God called the church into existence to be church in communities, churches to communities, or churches with communities? As you log your answers, I have to heap accolades onto my friend, Dr. Ricardo Delahaye. As he pointed out, he and I are personal friends, and it's very good when you don't have to make up stuff to say about the preacher. When you can actually see that person as an actual friend. Dr. Delahaye, although significantly younger than I am, was one of the first individuals that I ran into had this concept in this mind for community engagement that went beyond our giving monies to the general conference, the union, and or the conference, and then doing mission spotlight on Sabbaths. I don't hear nobody. Dr. Delahaye was one of the first people that said we needed to go above and beyond mission spotlight during Sabbath school, or in that little segment before worship after Sabbath school. And that would constitute what we did as a church for and in or to or with our communities. And so I applaud him, and watching his journey in ministry has been very inspiring. That's just the God's honest truth. So I wanted to make sure everyone has been able to log their answers. I know that Daniel said he was logging off for a short moment there. Terrence, I got your answer. Dr. Fleming, I have your answer. Thank you very much. Sister Jefferson, I have your answer. Am I missing anyone? I see yours, Terrence.
Jonathan is at work, so
Okay. Okay, so that's good. And I'm going to come back to that. But I wanted your answers on the front end of this presentation so that by the time we have concluded, maybe some of your minds will have been changed, or someone will have found the necessary ammunition to substantiate their viewpoint on whether or not the church should be a church in, to, and or with a community. I want to start, as Dr. Delahaye pointed out, giving you a little bit about my background. Of course, I grew up in Southern California, and Southern California, growing up there with my grandmother, gave me a view then that I didn't know would come into play until later. And that is, it helped me see the conundrum that is the church, the Christian church in America. And the Christian church in America has somehow, and in many instances, become like a magic kingdom or Disneyland, Disney World, depending on what part of the world you're in. The best way to describe it is, again, when I was a kid, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, California. Every summer, we'd go as a family because my grandmother worked at a bank, and she would get everybody, I mean, all of our friends, anybody who wanted to go, these discount tickets to Disneyland. And once we were inside of Disneyland, everything was crispy, everything was clean, everything was happy, everything was controlled. And it even gave us this illusion of racial and ethnic harmony. If you've been to Disneyland at any point in your life, there's a ride called It's a Small World After All, where they have all the races, all the nationalities, everybody singing in harmony. I hate to say it, but this Kumbaya-esque song that It's a Small World has become. But everything in Disneyland, the rides, the food, the programs, the music, all were there to entertain and amuse you while you were there. All you had to do was show up and observe. But if you're not from California, particularly in the area that I grew up in, what you don't realize is just beyond the gates of Disneyland is Anaheim and the rest of LA, including Compton. Now, in order to get to Disneyland, you have to go through Compton. And so you could go through Compton, get to Disneyland, and forget about everything that was happening on the outside. You could forget about the crime that you had to pass through to get to Disneyland. You could forget about the marginalized minorities that you had to pass through to get to Disneyland. You could forget about the poverty. You could forget about the drug use that you may have witnessed. You could forget about all of that once you made it into the Magic Kingdom. And that is what the church in some instances has become. We are this magic kingdom in these communities that we once a week pass through the Comptons, or as was stated, I pastored in North Philadelphia. The community I was in had the 6th highest recidivism rate in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania itself has more people incarcerated per 100,000 than 12 founding NATO countries, right? So you could go through North Philly, you could go through Southeast DC. I don't know where some of you are tuning in from, but you could go through Bankhead, you could go through some of the and get in to get into Disneyland, and then forget about everything that was going on the outside. But God has not called us to create more songs or more rides or any. He has called us to tear down the gates of hunger, to tear down the gates of mass incarceration, to tear down the gates of human trafficking, to tear down the gates of addiction. And we do all of that. And by doing all that, we also tear down the very gates of hell. I want to zero in. I was listening to some of what you guys were sharing about some of the handicaps that come with being Seventh-day Adventists. And I would like to just tweak a couple of things that I heard. And one of those was that our eschatology has been what has hamstrung us. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because if we were very, very astute as it concerns the Adventist eschatology, we would never be the people crying about church not being political. You have to realize we are the people who gave to the world the understanding that America is Protestantism and republicanism. So that there is a merger right there of church and state. You have to understand that the entire, not just the gospel, not as only the gospel political, but the entire Bible is set in a political backdrop. as Dr. Delahaye pointed out, God's very existence destabilizes things. You may not have looked at it like this before, but when Abraham is called, the way that the people groups of the Ur of the Chaldees existed was their families depended on one another. You see this in some African communities now, where there are individuals in a family that do different things. One may do animal husbandry, one may be a farming expert, one may be a carpenter, and so they pull their collective resources as well as their human capital in order to make a community for their families. So when Abram leaves, what he does is he destabilizes, in some regards, his family. God does that, and the way he does that is he tells Abraham, he speaks to Abraham and gives Abraham a promise. Now, what we don't realize, and we lamented in our eschatology, is that in the time of the Mesopotamian era, this is not theological, this is just historical, in the Mesopotamian era and the Egyptian era, there was no difference in church and state. So if Abram is being told by a God to separate from his family, that is going to disrupt both his religious life as well as his social, the social aspects of his life. So the children of Israel go down into Egypt and they're there for 400 years. And when God comes to Moses, he comes to Moses and tells Moses, he doesn't send Moses to what we would call where they practice the Egyptian mysteries, right? To Karnak. He didn't send him to the priest of Egypt. He sent him to the Pontifex Maximus of his time. He sent him to a man who embodied both the religious aspects as well as the civic aspects of Egypt. In Pharaoh resided both religious and civil and or political power. And so when Moses and Aaron go into his court, they are going before a political leader. And at which point they engage in dialogue with this political leader. They're having both religious or what we would call religio-political conversations simultaneously. When they're asking if they can be let go to go and worship for a time, you look at it very carefully in the Hebrew, they're saying, let us go and worship, but God tells him he's declaring war on the gods of Egypt. Right. And so the whole background of the Bible is political. He is at war with not only the Pharaoh, who is the king, who is the civil authority, but he's also at war with his gods. The other thing, and Dr. Delahaye has brought me on here to talk about kind of social justice in the church. And here is one of the things that Adventism has done, not our eschatology, but three other areas. And I don't know if you guys have covered this or if this is something that you're familiar with. It is our ecclesiology. It is the way we do church. The way we do church, that's ecclesiology. And it's also our missiology, the way we advance the mission of the church. So the way that we go about advancing the mission and the overall approach to church, ecclesiology and missiology, I don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities here, but white people don't have the problems that we have. So when they talk about how to utilize the resources of a church, they're never going to talk about using them the way that we would have to use them, which is why a gentleman by the name of James Comm, but even before him, Albert Cleage, and you guys may have heard of some of these people, they started advancing what was called liberation theology. Liberation theology. Liberation theology found its way in and created a third problem that I believe Adventism has that prevents us from being all that the Black church is intended to be. It's our hermeneutic. Through the liberation movement, the Black liberation movement, the hermeneutic became a liberation hermeneutic, so that when we look at the Bible, we see the Bible through the lens of God as the great liberator. What is the first thing he says in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 1? We all know the 10 commandments, but he says, I am the God that brought you out of bondage. I liberated you. And from there, he says, here are now, because of my being a God of liberation, here are now the things that I want us to be in covenant about. And so African Americans were our unique contribution to theology is liberation theology. Our second unique liberation theology and a liberation hermeneutic. Our second unique contribution to Christianity here in America has also been womanist theology. Now, womanist theology is the theology where Black women felt that they didn't have a space, where Black men were fighting with liberation theology, white women were fighting with a new feminist framework and lens. And so in there, using the words of Alice Walker, where she talked about being womanist, and also appealing to Sojourner Truth's message when she once time visited the Senate saying, "Ain't I a woman?" So the black female theologian began to introduce this concept of womanist theology. So I would recommend to each of us that we familiarize ourselves with both liberation theology, go a little bit deeper than James Cone. James Cone is the father of liberation theology, if you will, but there are many others who contribute to the discipline of liberation theology as well as womanist theology. These are our heritage that we have been prevented from fully embracing and even engaging with to see if we agree with it, because our denomination ecclesiologically and missiologically is very Eurocentric. And so with that being said, I want to direct our attention to this concept of church in, with, or to a community. And I'm sorry, I'm a preacher. I want to direct your attention, even if only in thought, to Acts chapter 3. Acts chapter 3 is, their songs, silver and gold, that have been written about it. We know about what happened there, where Peter and John, excuse me, that's my job calling. Peter and John are going up to the temple, and they come to the gate called Beautiful. Everybody knows this story. They come to the gate called Beautiful, and there they run into this beggar who has been laid, the Bible says, daily at the gate. Now, the interesting thing about that is, while he has been laid daily at the gate, the Bible says some of his friends, they laid him daily at the gate. The Bible earlier in Acts chapter 2, verse 46 says that the disciples, particularly Peter and John, continued daily in the temple. So here is a dissonance, if you will, that the disciples have been going daily to the temple, and this man has been laid daily at the temple, yet their paths didn't cross until this day. Their paths didn't cross until this particular day, because they were, under the auspices of enacting and now living out parts of the Great Commission in concert with what they knew as Jews, were going daily to the temple for the hour of prayer, while this man was being laid daily to bed. And it wasn't until, and bear with me, it wasn't until something happened in the way they approached the temple, right? Whether it was they changed, whether they were coming from the south, east, or west, whether something interrupted them and they had to approach or get to the temple a different way, their approach to church changed on this day. Their approach to church changed. And because of the change to the way they approached, or the way they walked up to, or the way they accessed church, they then came into contact with this beggar who was not on the inside of the church, but who was on the outside of the church. After they engaged with this beggar on the outside of the church, you'll notice that there was a praise service on the outside of church. A sermon had in essence been preached on the outside of the church. An appeal had been given on the outside of the church. The man had been healed on the outside of the church. His testimony had been given on the outside of the church. He began to praise and worship on the outside of the church. And then they moved inside the church. If you look at the text says all of that happened on the outside of the church, because finally, for once, Peter and John weren't so consumed with church as usual. They were forced to change their approach, and that brought them into contact with all manner of ministry on the outside of the church. On the outside of the church. And so they were able to engage with the church, or engage with that individual on the outside of the church, change his life, and that impacted the individuals on the inside of the church. Could you imagine And most of us have this. I am a convert to Adventism, and Adventism did so much to change my life. I became an evangelist. Is anybody listening to the preacher? Because of how Adventism impacted my life, it was fire shut up in my bones. I couldn't help but tell people, being met outside of the church and evangelized and testifying and having that encounter on the outside of the church. The moment I joined the church, I then engaged in community services. I then engaged in outreach. I engaged in evangelism because of how the church impacted me on the outside. Now, church into with the community. Now, I first want to talk to the people who said, and let me bring up your chat. I want to talk about the people who said, church should all to the community. Let me see. Let me look at Herban. Where's Doc Fleming? Church should be all to the community. Amen. Amen. You did your catch-all. Sister Jefferson said, I believe all of these. Daniel said, church with the community, and Terrence said church with the community. So let's talk a little bit about church in a community. A church in a community, ladies and gentlemen, is a fortress, right? And why is it a fortress? Because a church in a community only takes up space. It has no intention, no desire to influence the community. It does not desire the community members to influence it. It invests efforts and resources only on members. It may be described in many ways as a fortress. Like when I started talking about the Magic Kingdom is in the middle of Compton. You got to get through Compton, but it has no desire to change anything about Compton. Everything that the Magic Kingdom is designed and set up to welcome people in, to consume, and then leave, never impacting Compton. It takes up space in the neighborhood, and many members commute to services and leave again. The church rarely pays taxes and is sometimes a drain on the neighborhood. When I was in Maryland, there was a moratorium placed by Prince George's County on churches because the churches only consumed. They did not put back into the communities. They took up spaces where there couldn't be any more businesses bought in. There couldn't be any more housing developments created. And that was not going to affect the bottom line of that city. So a church in a community is a fortress. We lower the drawbridge on Sabbath, let people in, we get our praise on, we give our lives to Christ anew, we confess our sins and how we haven't been right all week. We lower the drawbridge so people can get out, and then we close the drawbridge. And it is very cliche, but in that model, we are Adventists on the seventh day, not Seventh-day Adventists, right? We're only Christian on that day. We come in, we get our praise on, and then we leave. And so we should not be churches in the community. We should not be fortresses. You've heard it before, where people say, if your church burned down tomorrow, would anybody miss it? The people who can't answer yes, those are churches in communities. The next thing I asked is, should we be a church in or to a community? And this is nuanced, but I want you to think about it from the perspective of community development and engagement. A church to a community, it desires, now listen to me, and you're going to, oh yeah, of course. It desires to bless the community and contributes to the community on its own terms. So we have our Dorcas. Remember when we used to have Dorcas, y'all? We have our various ministries on the inside of the church, even MV back in the day. Y'all remember MV, missionary? Come on, somebody. Is anybody else in here old time Adventists? Okay, that's just me and Dr. Delahaye. But listen to me. What would happen is we would come together, the board would come together, the community services director, and we would decide we want to get him a soup kitchen. For Christmas, we would decide it's cold in New York and Connecticut, so we want to do a coat drive. Come on, somebody, right? We do all of these things, and guess who hasn't had any say in what we're going to give to them? The community, right? We have determined that the community needs coats, and we have determined that the community needs soup. We have determined that the community needs whatever they need. So we spend generally very small amount of resources on the community. We have limited access and involvement in the community stakeholders and in their plans, and we don't want them having a lot of impact on ours. We serve the community in the ways that we prefer with outcomes that we prefer and overlook the gifts and talents of the community. Again, like a church in a community, we take up space in the community and we perform services, but don't pay any taxes, and generally speaking, have a very neutral influence. A church to a community, because we come together at that special time of year at Christmas, and we get our Christmas baskets and our Thanksgiving baskets, and we come out and we hand them out benevolently to everybody. And then we go back in church, and on the next week, we pat ourselves on the back and talk about how we blessed them down there after we descended from Mount Olympus to give them community folks the stuff we think they need. And that contributes to our savior's complex. So a church in a community is a fortress. A church to a community is a savior. Now, I would like to suggest, and here is where the social justice comes in, and it's not just about Black, although I am openly Black. I don't know if y'all heard that more recent, but here is where we have the opportunity to enact an agenda that has social justice at its heart, is when we are a church with the community. Now, when we're a church with the community, and this is tough for Seventh-day Adventists because we have so many things, when I was at Metropolitan Seventh-day Adventist Church, we too, like Reverend Flake, had an assisted living facility. We had a major gym with a banquet hall in it. And we wanted to rent this thing out because we paid all of this money for it. Here it comes. And we wanted to rent it out to the community, and we set our rates and we put out our terms of service. And, we would get people who would come and they would say, we want to rent the hall. And we say, okay, that's fine, but you can't serve pork. You can't serve beef. You can't serve wine. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't. And so then we would be sitting back wondering, well, man, now this thing, we paying this mortgage on this building that we can't get anybody to come and take advantage of, that we felt like we built for them, that they were going to need this thing. And here's the thing. I'm not telling you that you need to let people drink, smoke, or whatever you're talking about. But what I am saying is, when you do things without consulting the community and then wonder why they don't take advantage of those services, a lot of times it's because we've been a church to or in the community and not church with the community. A young man that Dr. Delahaye and I know very well, we watched his ministry. He told me one of the saddest stories just a few weeks back. He had, during COVID-19, they had this portable basketball court on the grounds of the church. And the church, of course, had not been meeting, had not been convening, had not been doing Sabbath services for several months. And a member happened to drive by the church on a Sabbath and saw that the young men from the community were playing basketball in the parking lot on the portable basketball court. She called up the pastor. Now, again, this wasn't inside of a gate. It's just the parking lot. It's open. They have the basketball court there. They called the pastor and said, "Pastor, it's some young man playing basketball on the Sabbath." They playing, and this is in Mississippi. Y'all hear me? This is in Mississippi. This is in a neighborhood. Like, I don't know where y'all at now, but I know where I came from. Like, just for the neighborhoods I came from, I'm from South Central. And so these young Black men, "Pastor, they playing basketball on the Sabbath. We need to get that basketball hoop off of our thing." And so he didn't move it. And so again, somebody came and they called. And so eventually he said he took it and he moved it just off the land. And somebody came back in the next week, they had moved it back. And so he said, okay, well, I'm not going to tell him what to do. And he called the conference. Well, actually, the conference called him because they had some concerns. And the conference said, "Look, we don't have any problem. We don't have any problems with it. But the way we are set up as a representative model, it needs to be put to a vote." So the pastor comes and he puts it to a vote about the basketball court being on the land. And they voted to take the basketball court down off the land. And it was his job to go and tell these young men, y'all can no longer play here on any day because we're taking down the basketball court. And he said, man, he had tears in his eyes over that, because he is the representative of the church. And for him now to want to say anything to them is going to be impacted by the fact that a theology that they're not aware of, that they had no concern about in the past, is not relevant to them, because that church now represents taking something away from them that was an outlet in all that's going on in the world. And that's because that church board chose to be in the community and to the community, as opposed to with. When you're a church with the community, you're a convener church. You provide a welcoming place and space to bring people and groups together around issues, around challenges, around a need. A church with a community is an enabler or a facilitator. The church serves in roles, works with the community leaders and other voices to identify who else should be involved in making the connections and thinking through alternative strategies. The church with the community is a resource provider. The church, this role, it doesn't necessarily need to provide money to the community, but it can instead provide other things. It can provide its facilities. It can provide connections with peoples whose businesses or who are involved in local politics, who are also important resources for community effort. The skills and talents of the people of the church are a very important resource. And so when a church is a church with a community, I've gone to Dr. Delahay's church, and he has some city lawyers and some doctors and all those things that are in the church that the Black community may not know anything about. And when the Black church initially, in its early existence, this was the place where you found a lawyer when you were in trouble, where you found a doctor, that enabled the Black dollar to circulate in the community, because in that regard, the church was with the community. If the community had a problem, the church had the problem, because it was a church with the community. It was a partner. It was an advocate. It was a participant, an active participant in the needs of the community. It was a cheerleader and an encourager. When you're a church with the community, it is a cheerleader. It is an encourager. It is an active supporter. And we realize that if the if the community has a problem, we have a problem. I pastored in North Philadelphia. And again, as I pointed out, it had one of the highest recidivism rates in the city and in the state. And so it made sense to me, while we have a prison ministries, because of my willingness to partner with non-Adventist pastors, I was able to take our members into the jails with the chaplain for the state of Pennsylvania, for the Pennsylvania prison systems, the Pennsylvania prison system chaplain. Now, if you don't know this, the penal system in America gets its name penal system, while it is penalty, but the penitentiary system is because the first penitentiary was built in Pennsylvania. It's actually in Philadelphia. If you go downtown, this is interesting. It's like a museum now. But we then started to hear, because in our community, young boys were going to jail at the age of 16. They were committing crimes that was taking their freedom away for the rest of their lives. So it made sense for us to be going into the jails and giving Bible studies and giving resources and partnering with organizations like Angel Tree that gives out Christmas things to children of parents who are incarcerated. We sought out specifically ministries and partnerships with nonprofits and other denominations that worked in the area of the problems in our community. I was on Temple University's campus. I invited a young lady from Temple University, and I didn't know she would become this person. She's a white lady who was just, it's food deserts and the kids don't have food. And I was like, what are you talking about? They got food. They got those what were they? Student loans. Amen. Somebody, right? And what she helped us understand was that one of the biggest challenges facing millennials on college campuses was food insecurity. Food insecurity is a social justice issue. It's not just, and this is one of the things I think people get caught up on, social justice is not just about fighting and championing what's Black. Now that's an aspect too, but it's also listening for the voice of the oppressed, the voice of the downtrodden, the economically challenged, and then aligning yourself with institutions, organizations, nonprofits, other denominations, whoever it is, to meet that need, because that is what you see and hear they have a need for. So we partnered with Temple to where the kids, and it was crazy. I couldn't believe it. The amount of kids that were coming to our church to get stuff like soap. To get soap. I mean, to wash your body, soap, right? The amount of kids we started because we talking to the kids as the students, as they were coming by, and realized they didn't have any food. So we started a breakfast program where you could come and get a free breakfast. And yes, I didn't cook pork, but we started cooking turkey bacon and beef bacon, and them kids were coming and they were eating that food up. And guess what? Did it blow up the church and did we start pouring over the seams with people? No. But show me in the Bible where that is the objective of our ministry. Jesus would have been considered an abject failure if he was being measured by the metrics we are being measured by. Right. And so then, of course, we were in this time of people were getting shot down by the police. We had a couple of instances in our community as well. And so I reached out to the local sheriff's department. I reached out to the local police department, and I facilitated a conversation between some of the community people and the police department. And then I turned around and I did a first responders dinner, right? So that they could see that we were in partnership with them. So you saw that, look, while I'm for the people, I'm also in partnership with you to help my people. We learned that the ownership rate in our community of homes was abysmal. We learned that people were making some $20,000 below the median. So what do? We started free financial literacy programs. So whereas normally you have the Dave Ramsey program where you charge people $50 or $100, we started providing the resources at no cost to individuals so that they can learn how to do things like budget, so they can learn how to do. And this is social justice. And this happens when you are with the community. I began to sit on the board for several organizations. I was on the Sheriff's Faith Base Council. I was a part of Central Victim Services, which was if a woman was beaten or had nowhere to go, we provided resources and we provided we gave them, if they needed clothes, if they needed a place to stay, we did these things. That is social justice. And as I'm moving around the community and I'm talking to people and I'm talking to my city council people in Philadelphia, because Philadelphia, 5th largest city in the nation, 4th largest concentration of African Americans in the nation behind Chicago, Bed-Stuy, and Detroit. As I'm moving around and I'm realizing I have over 30 shelters around my church. I have 30 shelters around my church. I have a women's, like a men's shelter. I have a women's shelter. I have a YMCA. I have a drug program. And so I started going and as Dr. Delahaye pointed out, I started doing a survey on what they needed and realized that people, had trouble with dental work. People they couldn't get their teeth looked at, right? So so what we did was we did a free dental vision clinic, right? And in order to make it palatable, so you didn't feel like you were coming as a needy person, we blocked off the street, had a block party where there was a bouncy on one side. Your kids could go and do free horse rides. You had to go through, we set up our usual New Start program. You had to go to 9 stations. As you went to various stations, you got a ticket saying you went to that station and you were entered into, and I know y'all don't like this, but don't tell nobody I said it, you were entered automatically into a raffle, right? And so if you went through the 9 stations and collected that information, you were entered into a raffle. We gave away a couple of big screen TVs, a couple of Xboxes and PlayStation, whatever the ones, and we rented out some food trucks. So we're 2 vegan food trucks that gave like good vegan food, not because we didn't want to give, but to show them that good vegan food was not inaccessible or did not exist. But this got me recognized. The first one I did, Dr. Delahaye, by myself. The second one, my senator called me and said, hey man, are you going to do that thing again? We want to partner with you. And so the first one, the church paid for, the second one, the senator paid for. So these things become social justice. I don't want to get on here and belabor, joining up. If that's not your conviction, to be marching with Black Lives Matter, I'm not talking about the group, the organization. I'm talking about the chant that we matter, which matter is the minimum. I'm not telling you to join up with Black Lives Matter. That's another conversation for another time if Dr. Delahaye would have me. But I want you to see that when we say social justice, we are uniquely positioned because of the Seventh-day Adventist message. If you look at it in the way it came out of the testimonies, come on, somebody. You look at our health message, you look at our emphasis on stewardship, you look at our emphasis on education. These things right here are the reason why it has been stated and studied. When you look at blue zones in the world, one of the blue zones is by my hospital, Loma Linda, right? You look at how Adventism, those who participate in Adventism, typically move up in the social ladder. They move in one generation from poor potentially to middle class because of stewardship, because of the emphasis on healthy living, and because of the emphasis on education. I personally came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church when I was 27 years old. High school dropout, very bright in school, but high school dropout. All I ever wanted to do was be a rapper. I was able to achieve that dream and debuted #7 on Billboard, worked with some rap luminaries from my era. But then, of course, the money runs out because I don't know how to manage money. Of course, the record deal goes away because I'm not Ice Cube. I know y'all can't tell, but I'm not Snoop Doggy Dogg, right? So the money runs out. And it was the grace and the mercy of God that I've always loved to read. And so I'm reading Daniel, I'm reading Revelation, I'm studying. And I joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they see in me some gifts. They're now these educated Black people. I start giving my testimony, and everywhere I go, in every church I go to, even in the ghettos that I go to, I've preached everywhere. And there is always educated Black people. I mean, it was magnificent to me. And so eventually, even though I was 32 years old, I went to Oakwood College. That's where I met Dr. Delahaye. I had Adventist people who believed that I was called to ministry, who said, hey, look, we want to pour into you. Dr. Delahaye was blown away when he first met me. I was on school my whole first year. Some families from Australia were just paying me through school because they believed in my ministry. And from there, I adopted aspects of the health message. I ain't gonna lie to y'all on here. But that's why I don't look my age. Dr. Delahaye, I don't look my age, do I, Doc? Right. But then, the Lord blessed me to marry a good Adventist girl. Right. And so now, I mean, and it is amazing and miraculous that my sons are in college. I didn't get to college till I was in my 30s. My sons went to college straight out of high school. I own a home in Philadelphia. I own a home in Maryland. I'm about to buy a home out here. These are things I never would have imagined possible, but because of how the Adventist message at its core is really about community engagement and development, and can literally shift a person from one strata to another in terms of where you are in society, whether poor or middle class. If we are to understand that we are called to be churches with communities and look in the community, see what the community needs. Before I left North Philadelphia, we were in the process of working with the city to offer free mental health counseling to our community. This is social justice. And so I want to expand your view as is concerns a church with a community, partnering with the community to see the things that the community needs, and then building your ministries around them. I know it's easy to have the ministries that are already at your church, but that your church may not need, I don't know, some of the things that we used to do in church that were very popular that aren't as popular nowadays. But what your church may need, you have to have the courage when you go into these churches to do those things and know that as you do them, you are honoring what Christ said to us in Luke chapter 4. I think that's it. I want to, if you guys have any questions for me, I'm definitely open to answering any questions on anything that I've shared thus far.
Well, I'll say I really enjoyed the lecture, and I want to thank our professor for bringing you on tonight. I mean, it was really good. I do think, though, I would like to defend my answer 1 second, though.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mm.
I do believe that the paramount function of the church is to be with the community. I give you that. But I do think there's some validity of being to the community as well. I'll tell you why. In my estimation, and our church is a very poor neighborhood. We did the surveys trying to figure out what the community wants for ministry. And it turned out to be very, very informative. For example, 70% of those sampled were single parent households. So daycare, parks, people that care, safety, and all those things came into play. But what was never mentioned on the survey was that they wanted for need, which the church thought was important, and that is we have a lot of alcoholic in bars and stuff like that. There's no grocery stores. There's no pharmacy there. Mm-hmm. Now, so this is where the church can be to the community by bringing things that even the community hasn't even anticipated that they need. So that's why I went with all of them, because I can also say why we should be in. Because there's certain things that the community actually needs, but the community is not even aware of it because they don't have the acumen to make the decision. So now they have to drive 6 miles to get to a store, but there's no bus service.
Mm-hmm.
And this neighborhood, I'm in North Carolina. So they have no way. So
all right now.
So I do think that there is a time that the church also needs to also be an advocate for even that which the community has not even anticipated, that we do think that is necessary.
Dr. Fleming, I want to agree with you. Believe it or not, I think that the point that I'm making is that the mindset of the to the end versus the with, because even in some of what you said, there were hints of you guys being church with, right? Nowadays, a lot of churches are commuter churches. So they commute in with no knowledge of the fact that it's a food desert or a food swamp. When you were able to say, hey, look, we assessed the fact that the church, the community needed X, needed Y, needed Z, but didn't know to ask that, then I completely understand. But there are aspects of you guys having been with the community. Again, this is lecture material, right? To say, hey, let's begin to look at the difference between being a church to, being a church in, and being a church with. And so to that end, I agree with you. And I heard in a lot of what you said, I heard elements of you guys have been a church with a community. But thank you. I don't want to. I'm not shooting you down at all. You're spot on.
Hey. Listen, I'm with you, man.
So, here's something that I was thinking as you were sharing being a church with the community, and you just hinted at it, that we by and large have these commuter churches. I was looking for this book. You probably can't see it clearly. I was looking for this book on my shelf, The Disintegration of the Black Community by Robinson. I couldn't find it on the shelf, but Robinson argues that with the civil rights movement, the Black community splintered. Prior to the civil rights movement, we all lived in the same place, irrespective of socioeconomic standing. So a wealthy Black and a poor Black would live in the same neighborhood just by virtue of the fact that they were all Black. And so at that point, the church was literally the church was
the community.
Right.
Yeah.
It was part and parcel. And the challenge that we have today is that our churches really don't exist in our communities. And we were hitting on this last week. We, like you said, we drive in, we drive out. Pastors drive in and drive out, and so do the members. And so we have that challenge. Here's my question for you, and this may seem a bit radical. Do you think we should do away with commuter churches? Should we create churches where we live and have churches of the community? Or should we try to move back into urban spaces as other people are moving into urban spaces and create the church that is with the community there?
So there's a gentleman who wrote a book, Caucasian gentleman, wrote a book called Toxic Charity, where he advocates for exactly what you're saying, Dr. Delahaye. He talks about moving into those spaces so that you are viewed as being part and parcel of a community. I think that, and you know you can't talk radical, Dr. Delahaye, because I'm probably the most radical of our friend group. I believe that when you look at the Bible, what we see today in modern Christianity is an absolute demonstration of the grace of God. And why do I say that? Because I don't see the way that we are systematized in the Bible. I don't see God being against it, but I don't see this as the ultimate ideal that he had. For what we saw in the New Testament was what? We get in trouble nowadays because it sounds a lot like socialism or communism, right? And I'm not advocating for that. Don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is when you look at Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, they were breaking bread together daily. They weren't waiting on a 2-week revival. They weren't waiting to the end of a week to get together. They were breaking bread and the word daily from what? House to house. That's one. 2, in that context, they had all things in common so that no one among them had need. We have so systematized and so incorporated, if you will, church, that we've moved away from that. So I think that there is space. And I think that this is part of the reason why I believe that I'm not going to say that who the devil made the pandemic or God made it, but I think that the Lord may have been trying to get our attention a little bit, right? Because we had so deified the building and what happens there that this has become an opportunity. We are watching it. Forgive me. I don't want, and I'm measuring my words here, but I have seen people less talented and less gifted, if you will, blow up in this season, right? Because now they don't have to ask anyone for permission. Now they don't need the church's say so or the conferences say so. And I believe that there is space for both and, Dr. Delahaye. I think that we have been so enamored with and so invested in the system as it exists that people are afraid to do what I think COVID and this season gave them license, liberty, and freedom to do. So I think there's space for both and. That's my long way home.
I'm muted. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know even like for myself, I'm an older gentleman. I'm going to school in the maths program. And I'll just be honest, being up here in Northeastern Conference, I don't see a lot of African-American pastors in our conference, mostly from West Indians. And so because of COVID, I have an opportunity now of allowing my ministry to be on social media, different areas like that. And it actually got me to look at different areas. I'm applying for a chaplaincy program. I'm a veteran through the VA. I met a state representative, and he encouraged me and hooked me up with the guy that runs the religious programs for the state penal institution. So I'm in the process of getting a license to go preach in the prisons. So I'm not focused now on trying to become a pastor or in the church. If that opens up, so be it. But I believe that that ministry is more than that. I think when I first started in the maths program, my whole mindset was, well, I might have to move to another conference or wherever it opens up, or, I might have to even be separated from my family. But God has opened up more avenues for me. And so now I ran into an old friend from high school. He's not an Adventist, but he's a Christian. He has 2 buildings now where he owns, and he takes guys who are coming out of the prison. We're going to partnership together. I'm going to get a couple of partners. We're going to start a nonprofit. And I sit on the board for East Hartford clergy with the police. And so what we're going to do there, and they also have small businessmen on there, I'm going to try to open up a line of communication to get these guys when they come out of prison to help them find employment. There's a lot that needs to be done in our community, more so than just trying to end our situation. I'm realizing now than trying to become a pastor of a church. Now, that was my goal. But God is showing me other things now. He's opened up other avenues. And I believe it's because I've always been community oriented. And, so I like what you're saying. That's why I said with. I think one of the things that I struggle with my church is that most of the people drive in, we have service, and they drive out. No one really wants to get in the community where I'm trying to get involved. Even if, I invite elders and our pastor to come to our, we meet like every 2 months with the local community with the police, and because of the mindset that everyone's too busy. So I just took it upon. I'm the only one Seventh-day Adventist person that sits on this board, and I'm the only one that's not a pastor. So I think that, yeah.
And I think that what we're seeing right now is, and this was something I didn't realize it until I got into full-time pastoral ministry, and it's biblical. And we have so highlighted the gift of pastoring. We are sometimes just as guilty as some of our Pentecostal brethren who highlight the gift of tongues, right? So everybody's aspiring to be a pastor as though there aren't other gifts in the body, as though there aren't other, he led captivity captives and gave gifts unto men. And so when we look at the gifts of the Spirit, when we look at the fruit of the Spirit, we are so sometimes focused on pastoring and pulpitting that we don't realize that you got to pulpit wherever you are. Like Jesus turned every single space he stood into a pulpit, right? But what we want, and I was talking to a young man the other day who called me up, Dr. Delahaye. He listened to a sermon I had preached, and he called me, I want to do that, but in his voice, he's saying, but I don't need to be in the system. And I said, look, bro, this your man's hollering at you right quick. Be honest with yourself that you want to be a pastor. Well, pastor, I'm not. So I said, no. I said, look, doc, this ain't the first conversation we had. And I said, you first have to be honest with yourself about what you want to be so that you can take the necessary steps in that direction. But stop playing the game, because you think that's what people, I don't really want to do that. But what we have to do is we have to ask God, first and foremost, God, what have you uniquely gifted, called, and outfitted me to do? Be resolute in that. Be committed to that, and then he will do what? I don't know if you guys have preached it, but I'm sure I have, and I think I've stolen it, at least one sermon from Dr. Lay, when the Bible says that the hand of God closed the ark. That was a door by virtue of how the ark was built that only God could close and only God could open. And so when you are resolute and following what God has gifted uniquely he has ordained, gifted, outfitted you to do, he will then open doors that only he can open and shut doors that only he can close. But we first and foremost have to be honest with ourselves about what God has called us to. And if it's not, and say, hey, God, I don't want to do that. Let me do something else. And deal with what he says to you after that. You're muted, Doc.
Thank you, Pastor Johns. You are the man. You are excellent. Your presentation was timely, helped us to refocus. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wish we could go on all night, but we have 3 minutes. Thank you, Pastor Johns. Listen, everybody should have this book already. Out of the Hood. Don't Leave the Neighbor Out of the Hood. I emailed everyone this book last week. Everybody got that email? And asked you to purchase these two books. Let's read in this book through chapter 7, I believe, for next week. This book was written by Dr. Jamie Colasar through chapter 7, yes. This is Don't Leave the Neighbor Out of the Hood. So we'll center our discussion on chapters 1 through 7 next week. Ooh, sorry. Don't worry about submitting any assignments for this week. I am still revamping those assignments. There will be a book review on this book before the end of the course. There'll be a book review on this book. So the next 2 weeks, we're going to spend time Don't Leave the Neighbor Out of the Hood by Dr. Colasar. The following few weeks will be on faith-rooted organizing. I emailed this to you guys last week. Did everybody get the email? No?
Yeah, I'm going to have to order my books on Monday, though, but I did get the email.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It went to your Oakwood email.
Yes.
If you don't use that email, if you could just send me the email that you do use, I'll email you there. So yeah,
Pastor, you did tell us to write a page on the sermon that we listened to. So yes. I did upload that on week 2. Is that where we're supposed to put it?
Okay, so let me, I am so unfamiliar with D2L. I am much more familiar with Moodle. That's what we use at New York Theological Seminary. D2L is a strong learning curve, so I have not seen that. But if you could just email me, that would be
I'll
great.
email it to you. Okay, I can do it that too. I'll do that.
You can just email that one-page reflection on that sermon. And yeah, we'll get together next week and we'll be discussing pages 1 through 7 out of this book. Terrence, you're going to order the book on Monday, so you're not going to get it in time to read and discuss. But hopefully
Is it on Amazon?
it is on Amazon. Let me hold on.
And he probably can get it on Kindle. You get it right away.
Yeah. I think one of them did. I have it by Tuesday. Yeah, because what happens is because I'm a veteran, all my stuff is set up with the bookstore, and that book's not in the bookstore.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's not in the Oakwood's bookstore, and I just paid my kids' tuition, so my funds are a little too money. My daughter just got into Howard, so you know. Yeah, she's going to Howard. Yeah.
So I'm putting the link in right now. It is available on Kindle. It's $9.99 on Kindle.
Okay.
It's $19.99 on via hardback. I purchased the hardback version. I'm also putting into the chat the other text, so you all will. I actually like the updated Zoom because I wasn't able to click on a link before from Zoom, so they're doing a great job.
Okay. So is Zoom going to be now in the D2L or just from the, because I couldn't find it earlier.
So let me try to put it in D2L. I did email out this link last week. I'll put the new D2L link for you.
Okay.
And so I will put it. Where do you all usually access it? Is it just at in the home screen?
Yeah, there's usually let me see.
Let's see.
Let's see. Either course content or they have resources. And then some of them have Zoom. There's a Zoom link within D2L. I don't know if you can, I don't know how you upload in there, but I know some of the classes, you go right to Zoom and then the link's right there and it's reoccurring. You can click on it.
Okay, I'm going to try to set this thing up so that you guys will have it. I think
so we're not following the outline in the schedule because I thought it was you read some chapters from Andy Stanley's book and
that was the old syllabus. That wasn't my syllabus, so I tried to. I thought I pulled it down, but
I bought all those books.
I'm so sorry. This book was on that. I thought that syllabus was a bit much. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. There were like 10 books on the syllabus. And I'm this doesn't make any sense. So I pulled that down. That was the last professor's syllabus. So it's just too much for me. And the syllabus seemed like they were reading 2 chapters out of one book and 2 chapters.
Right.
This makes no. So I'm sorry if you can return those books.
No, it's okay because I mean I've read one of them already actually, and it's okay. I just added to my fund of knowledge. It's okay.
So Dr. Delahaye, are we doing the discussion question tonight then, or are we waiting till next week?
No discussion question.
Okay.
Just if you could email me that 1-page reflection on the sermon and try to get reading done for next week so we can have a full discussion on this. And I am trying to get Dr. Colasar, who is the author of this book, to be our guest speaker.
Wow.
We're working out so that he can come in and we can kind of pick his brain or challenge or just have general discussion. Listen, it's 8:04. I've kept you too long already. God bless you all. If you have any questions for me, you have my phone number. You can text me. You can email me. Bless you all. Father, thank you for the time we've spent together. Thank you for the focus on church and community, especially social justice. Please be with each one of us as we minister. Please continue to guide our thoughts and bless our churches. God, please give us a vision of what our ministry with our community can be. And God, please enable us and empower us to go forward and bring the kingdom to our communities. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. God bless you guys.
God bless.